Hi guys, tonight, we travel back into one of the quietest corners of the ancient world. The stars rest above a wide and gentle river, and the warm air still carries the last breath of the day. The land has grown silent. Only the soft sound of moving water and the distant call of a night bird remain awake. Far beyond the dark outline of the palm trees, rows of simple mud brick homes sleep beneath the same sky that watched countless generations before them. Close your eyes for a little while, and allow the slow rhythm of the Nile to guide your thoughts. There is nowhere to hurry. Nothing asks to be done. The night is patient, just as it has always been. Every quiet breeze moves through reeds along the riverbank with a whisper that seems older than memory itself. In this peaceful darkness, we begin to understand a simple question. Why did the people of ancient Egypt follow such strict traditions? Why did families repeat the same customs day after day, season after season, century after century? The answer does not begin inside a palace. It does not begin beside a golden throne. It begins inside a small home where tomorrow will look almost exactly like yesterday. A faint oil lamp glows inside one of those homes. Its small flame dances gently against rough plaster walls. Shadows stretch quietly across woven mats spread over the floor. A family sleeps close together. Their blankets are simple linen cloths. Their pillows are carved wooden rests that lift their heads slightly above the floor. The room is warm, even now. During the hottest months, the heat never truly leaves the walls. Outside, sandals rest beside the doorway. A clay jar holds precious water collected before sunset. A woven basket waits for bread that will be baked again in only a few hours. Nothing inside this home appears unusual. That is exactly the point. Ordinary life was the heart of ancient Egypt. Most people would never meet a king. Most would never stand inside a great temple. Most would never witness a famous ceremony recorded by scribes. Their world was smaller, quieter, and shaped by routines that almost never changed. Long before the first light reached the eastern sky, someone in the household would awaken. Not because of an alarm. Not because someone commanded them. But because every day had its own familiar rhythm, and generations before them had risen at nearly the same moment. The air before sunrise was cooler than it would be later. It offered a brief gift before the desert heat returned. Families learned to treasure those early hours. The mother quietly stirred the ashes inside a small clay oven. She added fresh fuel collected from dried reeds, bits of wood, and animal dung that had been carefully saved for cooking fires. Soon the smell of warm smoke drifted softly through the house. Nearby, grain waited inside storage jars. The grain had not appeared there by chance. Months earlier it had been planted beside the Nile after the flood waters slowly pulled away from the fields. It had grown beneath bright sunlight, harvested by careful hands, carried home in baskets, dried, protected from moisture, and stored against hunger. Every loaf of bread carried the memory of many quiet days. A grinding stone rested near the doorway. Before breakfast could be made, grain had to become flour. This work often belonged to women and older children. They pushed one heavy stone over another again and again. The sound was slow. Stone against stone. Again. And again. A rhythm repeated thousands of mornings across the valley. Their shoulders became strong from years of this work. Their hands became rough. Fine dust floated into the air and settled across skin and clothing before disappearing into the warm light of morning. The work was not exciting. It was simply necessary. Perhaps that is one secret of ancient Egypt. Tradition was not only about belief. It was also about survival. When something kept a family alive for generations, Few people wished to change it. Soon the first bread baked over the warming fire. Its smell filled the room with quiet comfort. A clay pot held onions gathered from nearby fields. Another contained dried fish caught along the river several days before. Breakfast was simple. Bread, fish, onions, perhaps a few dates. Sometimes fresh beer made from grain. Not the strong drink many imagine today, but a nourishing everyday beverage that was safer than standing water and common across every level of society. Children slowly opened their eyes. They rubbed sleep away as the first sunlight reached the narrow doorway. Outside, roosters called. Donkeys shifted their weight. Dogs stretched across dusty ground. Another ordinary day had begun. No one wondered whether life should suddenly become different. Instead, they wondered whether the flood would arrive on time. Whether enough grain would grow. Whether illness would stay away from the family. Whether the jars would remain full until the next harvest. Tradition gave people something dependable inside a world that could never be completely controlled. The Nile itself seemed to encourage this way of living. Each year the great river rose. Each year it spread rich dark soil across the land. Each year the water slowly returned to its banks. This dependable pattern shaped every village. Farmers watched the river almost as carefully as they watched the sky. Children learned its seasons before they learned many other things. Old people remembered floods from decades earlier. Stories passed from grandparents to grandchildren not because they were entertaining, but because they helped the next generation prepare. Memory became a tool. Habit became protection. Custom became comfort. As the morning continued, the village slowly filled with movement. Men carried wooden hoes toward the fields. Some led oxen that walked with patient strength. Others balanced baskets across their shoulders. Women swept small courtyards using bundles of reeds tied together. Children carried water jars that seemed almost too large for them. Even these young hands learned responsibility early. Everyone belonged to the daily rhythm. The dusty road slowly filled with footprints. Sandals pressed gentle shapes into the earth. A passing breeze lifted loose dust into the morning sunlight. Nothing hurried. There was work to finish. But there was also an understanding that tomorrow would bring similar work again. One farmer paused beside the edge of an irrigation canal. He looked quietly across fields where green shoots stretched from dark soil. His father had stood here. His grandfather had stood here. Perhaps his great-grandfather had also watched the same water moving through the same channels. The tools changed very little. The methods changed even less. Some people today might wonder why. But for the farmer, change itself could be frightening. If the old ways filled the storage jars, why risk empty ones? His careful movements had been taught over many years. As a small child, he had watched older relatives working beside him. Later he carried tiny baskets. Then larger ones. Eventually he worked beside the adults. No formal lesson was required. Life itself became the teacher. Across the village, another family prepared linen cloth. Flax plants harvested months earlier had been soaked, dried, beaten, and combed into fine fibers. Patient fingers twisted those fibers into thread. Later, thread became cloth. The work demanded calm attention. There was little conversation. Only quiet breathing. Soft scraping sounds. The occasional song, sung gently enough that it blended with the morning air instead of rising above it. Tradition lived inside these songs as well. Some melodies were older than anyone could remember. The words changed slowly across generations, but their peaceful rhythm remained familiar. A child listening nearby might someday sing the same tune while teaching another child. Nothing needed to be written. Memory carried everything forward. Nearby, inside a crowded workshop, a potter shaped wet clay upon a turning wheel. His hands moved without hesitation. The clay answered every gentle touch. Years of practice had removed uncertainty from his movements. Bowls, storage jars, cooking pots, water containers. Every family depended upon them. Few people noticed the quiet skill hidden inside ordinary objects. Yet every meal depended on someone's experienced hands. The potter did not seek fame. He sought balance. If the walls of a jar were too thin, it might crack. Too thick, and it became heavy. Each careful motion reflected knowledge gathered across many years. Knowledge itself became another tradition passed from teacher to student. The sun climbed higher. Its warmth settled across rooftops. The cool morning slowly disappeared. People wrapped linen cloth around their heads for shade. Sweat formed across brows. Work continued anyway. The heat was expected. Complaining could not change the sky. So people adjusted themselves instead. This quiet acceptance shaped much of daily life. It did not mean people enjoyed hardship. It meant they understood that some parts of life belonged to nature rather than to human wishes. By midday, even the birds seemed quieter. Workers searched for patches of shade. Some rested beneath date palms. Others leaned beside mud brick walls still cool inside. Bread was shared again. Fresh water passed from hand to hand. Conversation remained gentle. Many words were unnecessary among people who had lived beside one another for years. Silence itself became comfortable. No one felt required to fill every quiet moment. The village breathed slowly beneath the bright Egyptian sun. And without anyone realizing it, another tradition quietly continued. Not because a king demanded it. Not because punishment waited. But because thousands of ordinary people believed that repeating what had always worked offered the safest path through another peaceful day beside the timeless waters of the Nile. The afternoon settled over the village like a warm linen cloth laid gently across tired shoulders. The bright light softened only a little, and the air shimmered above the fields where the dark earth slowly released the heat it had gathered since sunrise. The sound of work continued, but it was never loud. Wooden tools touched the soil with quiet purpose. Water moved through narrow canals with a steady murmur. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey gave a slow call before returning to its patient walk. No one expected the middle of the day to feel easy. The people of ancient Egypt knew the weight of the sun as well as they knew the faces of their own families. They understood that the hottest hours demanded patience more than speed. A person who hurried too much beneath the burning sky would soon find their strength slipping away. So the pace remained measured. Hands continued their work. Feet continued their familiar paths. Life unfolded one careful task at a time. For many farmers, this slow rhythm had begun before they were old enough to remember. As children, they had walked behind parents carrying baskets far too large for their small arms. They watched seeds disappear beneath soft soil. They watched water arrive from the canals. They watched green shoots push through the earth after many quiet days. No one rushed those lessons. There was no need. The fields would teach them every year for the rest of their lives. A father rarely explained every detail. Instead, he demonstrated the same movement over and over until it became part of the child's own body. The child copied his hands. Then copied them again the following season. Years later, those same hands would guide another young family member in exactly the same way. Knowledge flowed through generations much like the Nile itself. Always moving. Always returning. Always familiar. The river shaped more than the land. It shaped the mind. Every village measured time by its changing waters. Long before clocks existed, people understood the passing seasons through the river's gentle rise and fall. They watched the edges of the banks with careful eyes. They noticed where reeds grew taller than before. They remembered how high the flood had reached many years earlier. Older villagers often carried these memories with quiet pride. An elderly farmer might sit outside his home after a day's labor, rubbing sore knees while speaking softly to grandchildren gathered nearby. His voice was slow, never hurried. He remembered a flood that had arrived late. Another that had covered nearly every field. One year when fish had been especially plentiful. Another when insects had troubled the crops. His stories were not told to entertain. They were practical gifts. Each memory carried a lesson hidden inside ordinary life. The children listened because one day they would need those memories themselves. In this way, tradition became a living bridge between generations. It was not frozen. It was carried. A little farther along the dusty road, the village baker worked beside an oven whose clay walls had darkened after years of steady use. The fire inside glowed with quiet determination. Warm air drifted from its opening, carrying the comforting smell of fresh bread across nearby homes. People recognized that smell immediately. It was the scent of another ordinary day continuing exactly as expected. The baker measured ingredients without scales. His eyes had learned the right amount long ago. His hands understood the texture of good dough before his thoughts found words for it. A little more water. A little less flour. A few careful turns. Nothing wasted. Nothing hurried. Experience quietly replaced written instruction. Nearby, women shaped dough into simple loaves before placing them inside the hot oven. Their fingers worked with steady confidence. Small children watched from the doorway, waiting for a chance to help when they grew older. The smallest tasks belonged to everyone. A child could gather reeds. Another might carry kindling. Someone else could brush loose grain from the floor. These simple responsibilities slowly prepared them for larger ones waiting in the years ahead. No ceremony announced these changes. One day a child simply discovered that they had become someone others depended upon. The workshops remained busy despite the afternoon heat. Carpenters shaved rough wood into smooth boards using copper blades that demanded frequent sharpening. The scent of fresh cut wood mixed with dust drifting through open doorways. Wooden stools, storage chests, farming tools, and simple furniture slowly took shape beneath practiced hands. Every piece served a purpose. Decoration existed, but usefulness always came first for ordinary families. A chair that remained strong through many seasons was valued more than one covered with beautiful carvings. Durability itself became a tradition. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully swept wood shavings into neat piles. His teacher spoke only when necessary. Hold the blade lower. Watch the grain. Take your time. The apprentice nodded more often than he answered. Learning demanded observation before conversation. Mistakes were corrected gently, but carefully. Good habits formed slowly. Bad habits became difficult to remove. The same careful teaching could be found throughout the village. A fisherman learned where the river flowed quietly beneath its surface. A potter learned exactly how wet the clay should feel. A scribe learned how to guide a reed pen across smooth papyrus without allowing ink to spread too far. None of these skills appeared overnight. Each one grew from thousands of repeated actions. Perhaps this is another reason ancient traditions became so strong. Mastery itself depended upon repetition. As the afternoon slowly passed, a small group of fishermen guided narrow wooden boats away from the shore. Their paddles entered the water with barely a splash. The river accepted them quietly. The Nile carried many gifts: fish, water for crops, travel, rich soil, cool evening air. Without the river, villages like this could never have survived. The fishermen knew its moods well. They watched ripples moving across the surface. They noticed birds circling overhead. They recognized places where fish gathered beneath floating reeds. Their fathers had shown them these places. Their grandfathers had done the same. The river remembered every generation. Inside one boat, an older fisherman untangled a woven net while a younger man watched closely. The older man's fingers moved with surprising speed despite their age. Years of repairing torn nets had made every motion natural. He paused only once. "This knot lasts longer," he said quietly. The younger fisherman leaned closer. He copied the movement. Nothing more needed to be said. The lesson continued in silence. Along the shoreline, women filled clay jars with fresh water. They balanced the heavy vessels upon their heads with remarkable ease before beginning the slow walk home. Their footsteps followed paths worn smooth by countless generations. The road itself carried memory. Every bend, every stone, every familiar tree. People rarely questioned why the path curved where it did. Someone long ago had found the easiest way. Everyone afterwards simply followed. Sometimes tradition survived because it asked nothing difficult. It simply invited each new generation to place their feet where older footsteps had already proven safe. As daylight slowly softened, children gathered beneath the shade of palms after finishing their chores. Their laughter floated gently through the warm air before fading once again into the quiet sounds of village life. Even play reflected the world around them. They molded tiny figures from damp clay. They tossed smooth stones. They imitated adults tending fields or rowing boats. Without realizing it, they rehearsed the lives they would someday live. Childhood and adulthood were not separated by great distance. One slowly became the other. The seasons themselves seemed to guide every stage of life. A little farther away, beneath the shelter of a modest home, an elderly woman carefully repaired a woven basket. Her eyesight had weakened with age, yet her fingers still remembered every movement. She no longer worked as quickly as before. No one expected her to. Her value now rested inside memory. Young women often visited her with questions. How should flax be prepared? When should herbs be gathered? Which basket weave lasted through the harvest season? She answered patiently. Not because she wished to preserve old customs for their own sake, but because those customs had carried families safely through many difficult years. Experience deserved respect because experience had already survived hardship. As shadows slowly lengthened across the village, workers began returning from the fields. Their shoulders drooped beneath the weight of another long day. Dust covered their ankles. Sweat darkened their linen clothing. Hands showed fresh scratches from reeds and rough stone. No one appeared surprised by exhaustion. It was a familiar companion. People greeted one another with quiet smiles rather than loud celebration. There would be another day of work tomorrow. Strength needed to be saved. A young mother stood outside her doorway, waiting for her husband to return. Beside her, fresh bread cooled upon a woven tray. The smell drifted into the evening air alongside the scent of onions gently cooking inside a clay pot. Their children sat nearby, brushing dust from their feet before entering the house. Small habits mattered. Clean hands before eating. Water jars filled before sunset. Tools returned to their proper places. Sandals left neatly beside the doorway. These actions required only moments. Yet repeated every day across a lifetime, they became the quiet structure holding family life together. No written law demanded such things. Habit was enough. As the sun lowered toward the western horizon, its fierce brightness softened into warm shades of gold. Long shadows stretched across the fields where workers slowly disappeared along familiar roads leading home. Birds settled among the reeds. Cattle returned to their shelters. The breeze finally carried a welcome hint of coolness from the river. People breathed a little easier. The hardest heat had passed. Soon lamps would glow inside humble homes. Simple meals would be shared. Children would grow sleepy beside their parents. Outside, the stars would once again gather above the endless desert. And while each family believed they were simply finishing another ordinary day, they were quietly preserving something much larger than themselves. Every shared meal, every careful lesson, every familiar greeting, every repeated task. Together they formed an unbroken chain stretching across centuries, binding ordinary people to their ancestors through the quiet comfort of tradition, while the patient waters of the Nile continued their endless journey beneath the deepening evening sky. The evening arrived so gently that it almost escaped notice. The bright colors of the day slowly softened into warm shades of amber and pale bronze. The edges of the fields grew quieter as the last workers crossed narrow paths worn smooth by many generations of careful footsteps. The breeze coming from the Nile carried a welcome coolness at last, moving through clusters of papyrus reeds with a slow whisper that seemed to calm everything it touched. The village began to breathe differently. During the day, every sound belonged to work. Now the sounds belonged to home. Clay doors opened. Children called softly to one another before disappearing inside. Goats settled into small enclosures built beside family houses. A donkey shook the dust from its coat before lowering its head to rest. The long day was giving itself to the night. For the people of ancient Egypt, this daily change was as dependable as the rising of the sun. Every evening followed a familiar order. No one needed to discuss what came next. The rhythm already lived inside every member of the household. A woman returned from the river carrying the final water jar of the day. The jar was heavy. Its cool surface rested against the linen cloth folded upon her head, balancing carefully with each step. She had walked this same path hundreds of times before. She knew where the ground became uneven. She knew which stones became slippery after the river reached its highest level. She knew where children often gathered to play before supper. She did not think about these things. Her body remembered them. In many ways, tradition lived inside the body before it lived inside the mind. Hands remembered. Feet remembered. Eyes remembered. Long practice quietly replaced uncertainty. As she reached her doorway, her youngest child hurried forward with eager hands. Without speaking, the mother smiled and allowed the child to steady the water jar while she lowered it to the ground. The child had watched this simple movement since infancy. Soon it would become natural. Years later, another child would learn exactly the same lesson. No teacher would announce it. Life itself would pass the knowledge forward. Inside the house, the room remained pleasantly cool compared to the warm evening outside. Thick mud brick walls held back much of the day's heat. The fading sunlight entered through a small opening high above, painting soft golden lines across the floor. The family prepared the evening meal together. Grain that had been ground before sunrise had already become fresh bread. A clay pot rested above glowing coals. Inside, lentils cooked slowly with onions, herbs, and a little garlic. The gentle bubbling filled the room with a comforting sound that blended with the crackle of the fire. Nearby, dried fish waited upon a woven tray. Someone carefully sliced fresh vegetables gathered from a nearby garden. Nothing about the meal was extravagant. Nothing needed to be. The purpose of supper was not celebration. It was restoration. After many hours beneath the desert sun, warm food offered quiet comfort. The family gathered upon woven reed mats. There were no elaborate chairs. No towering tables. Everyone sat close together. Hands reached for bread. Pieces were broken and shared without hurry. Conversation remained soft. Children described small moments from the day. An older son spoke about repairing an irrigation channel. A younger daughter proudly explained that she had carried a full basket without dropping a single grain. The adults listened carefully. Small accomplishments mattered. Each one marked another step toward becoming capable members of the household. No praise needed to be loud. A gentle nod. A quiet smile. A few kind words. These were enough. Outside, the village slowly disappeared into twilight. The last sunlight rested upon distant palm trees before quietly slipping beyond the western desert. One by one, small oil lamps appeared inside neighboring homes. From a distance, they looked like tiny stars scattered across the earth. The village had become a peaceful constellation beneath the heavens. The smell of baking bread still drifted through the narrow streets. Smoke rose lazily into the cooling sky. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried for only a moment before being gently comforted. Then silence returned. This silence was never completely empty. It carried many small sounds. The chirping of insects hidden among reeds. The soft movement of sandals against packed earth. The distant splash of water as someone filled one final jar. The rustle of palm leaves answering the evening breeze. These quiet sounds formed the music of ordinary life. No musicians were needed. The village itself created its own peaceful song. Not far away, an elderly scribe sat outside his modest home with a young apprentice. Between them rested a small wooden writing board. Beside it lay a reed pen carefully trimmed for smooth writing. The old man's hands were marked by age, yet they still moved with remarkable steadiness. He dipped the pen into dark ink. Slowly, carefully, he drew familiar signs upon the surface. The apprentice watched without interrupting. Writing demanded patience. Each mark carried meaning. Each line required attention. Mistakes could not simply be ignored. The old scribe did not hurry his student. He knew that speed came only after years of careful practice. The hand must become calm, he said quietly. The eyes must become patient. The young apprentice nodded. He copied the symbols one at a time. His first attempts appeared uncertain. Some lines wandered slightly. Others leaned too far. The old man simply smiled. He had made the same mistakes many years before. Every experienced scribe had once held the pen with trembling fingers. Learning followed its own quiet pace. Nearby, another family repaired fishing nets beneath the fading light. The father stretched the net across wooden stakes while two older children carefully examined every knot. Small tears had appeared after several days upon the river. Each one needed attention. A neglected tear would soon become larger. Eventually, fish would escape through openings that could have been repaired in only a few moments. The father pointed toward one damaged section. The children leaned closer. "This knot first," he whispered. Again, there was no long explanation. Only demonstration. The children copied his movements. Their fingers became slower than his. Then steadier, then more confident. By repeating simple actions together, the family quietly protected tomorrow's meal. This was another reason traditions survived. They prevented small problems from becoming large ones. As darkness deepened, many villagers stepped outside for a little while before sleep. The heat trapped inside their homes slowly escaped into the cool night air. Neighbors greeted one another. Some exchanged fresh vegetables. Others discussed tomorrow's work in gentle voices. No one hurried the conversation. The stars were in no hurry. The river was in no hurry. There was comfort in matching their pace. An elderly woman looked toward the clear night sky. She recognized familiar patterns among the stars. Her grandmother had shown them to her many years earlier. Now she quietly pointed them out to her grandchildren. The children looked upward with wide eyes. They listened more than they spoke. The stars seemed unchanged. Their grandparents had looked upon them. Their great-grandparents had done the same. The sky itself reminded people that they belonged to a long and continuing story. This feeling encouraged respect for the old ways. When the heavens appeared constant, it seemed natural for life below to remain steady as well. Farther along the riverbank, fishermen prepared their boats for another morning. Their work continued even after sunset. Wooden paddles were checked for cracks. Ropes were carefully coiled. Clay lamps were placed where they could easily be found before dawn. Preparation tonight meant fewer troubles tomorrow. No task felt too small to deserve careful attention. Nearby, a young boy asked his grandfather why every rope had to be rolled in exactly the same way. The old fisherman chuckled softly. "If the river becomes rough before sunrise," he replied, "your hands should already know where everything belongs." The boy nodded thoughtfully. He began rolling the next rope more carefully. He understood. Order created calm. Calm allowed people to think clearly. Clear thinking often kept families safe. Many traditions began with simple practical wisdom. Only after generations passed did those habits become customs that everyone followed without question. The moon slowly climbed above the eastern horizon. Its pale light rested upon the quiet surface of the Nile. The river reflected the stars so clearly that it almost seemed to carry another sky upon its gentle current. A cool breeze crossed the water. It reached the village with remarkable kindness after the long heat of the day. People welcomed it without words. Children grew sleepy. Their voices became quieter. Parents gently guided them indoors. One by one, lamps were trimmed before being placed safely upon small shelves. Some families offered quiet prayers of gratitude before resting. They thanked the gods for water, for grain, for healthy children, for another peaceful sunset. Their prayers were not always grand. Many were simple. Many were deeply personal. Like their daily routines, these moments of devotion followed familiar patterns learned from parents and grandparents. Repeating them brought comfort. Even when life felt uncertain, the words remained steady. A familiar prayer could calm an anxious heart much as a familiar song could soothe a restless child. Inside one small home, a grandmother carefully folded linen garments that had been washed earlier in the day. She smoothed every piece before placing it inside a woven chest. Nothing was thrown carelessly aside. Respect for useful possessions had become another quiet tradition. Making cloth required so much labor that every garment deserved careful treatment. Children learned this lesson by watching rather than listening. Actions taught more deeply than speeches. The fire gradually faded into glowing embers. Its gentle warmth lingered while shadows stretched peacefully across the room. Family members settled onto woven mats. Some rested their heads upon carved wooden headrests polished smooth by years of use. Outside, insects continued their endless evening chorus. The village had nearly fallen asleep. Only an occasional traveler moved along the dusty road. Only an occasional fisherman remained awake beside the river. The night wrapped itself around the settlement with quiet patience. Tomorrow would arrive before long. The same birds would greet the dawn. The same ovens would warm with fresh bread. The same fields would welcome careful hands. The same traditions would quietly guide another ordinary day. Not because people feared change alone, but because every familiar custom carried the memory of countless lives that had endured beneath the same sun, walked beside the same river, rested beneath the same stars, and discovered that peace often lived within the gentle rhythm of doing faithful things, one calm day after another. Long before the first hint of morning touched the eastern horizon, the village rested in a silence that felt almost sacred. The night had not completely ended, and the day had not yet begun. This gentle space between darkness and dawn belonged to quiet breathing, slow dreams, and the endless flow of the Nile. The river moved as it always had, carrying cool water through the valley without asking for praise. Above it, thousands of stars remained bright, reflected softly upon the calm surface until it became difficult to tell where the heavens ended and the water began. Inside the homes of the village, families still slept. The oil lamps had long since burned low. Their small flames had disappeared, leaving behind only the faint scent of cooled clay and smoke. The warmth stored inside the mud brick walls slowly drifted away into the cool night air. A child turned gently while sleeping. Nearby, an older man shifted one tired shoulder before settling again. Someone breathed deeply after a long day beneath the sun. These quiet sounds filled the room more completely than conversation ever could. The people of ancient Egypt knew this peaceful hour well. It arrived every single day. It never hurried. It never delayed. Even in sleep, the rhythm of life continued. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of a date palm. The tree answered with a soft rustling sound that traveled across rooftops before fading once again into silence. Somewhere along the riverbank, a heron stood motionless in shallow water, waiting with endless patience for the first signs of daylight. The world seemed content simply to exist. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing called for urgency. It was in these quiet hours that tradition revealed another purpose. It created certainty before the day even began. Every person sleeping inside the village already knew what tomorrow would ask of them. The baker would prepare his oven. The farmer would walk toward the fields. The fisherman would untie his boat. The scribe would sharpen his reed pens. The potter would knead fresh clay. The children would help wherever small hands were needed. There was comfort in knowing. A life filled with familiar duties allowed the mind to rest more easily during the night. Far beyond the village, the broad fields waited beneath a blanket of darkness. Rows of grain stood quietly in the still air. Irrigation canals reflected scattered stars upon their smooth surfaces. The earth itself seemed asleep. Yet beneath the soil, roots continued their slow work. Seeds quietly gathered strength. Tiny living things moved unseen. Even while people rested, the land continued its patient rhythm. The ancient Egyptians noticed these quiet patterns. Nothing important seemed to happen quickly. Plants grew little by little. Children became adults one season at a time. Mud bricks hardened slowly beneath the sun. Wood dried over many weeks. Even the great river changed its level gradually, almost too gently to notice from one day to the next. Perhaps this is why patience became one of their greatest strengths. They rarely expected immediate results. Instead, they trusted steady effort. A single morning of farming could not fill a granary. One afternoon of weaving could not clothe an entire family. One lesson could not create a skilled craftsman. Everything worthwhile asked for repetition. Everything lasting asked for time. As the eastern sky slowly lightened with the faintest touch of pale gray, one elderly woman opened her eyes. She had awakened before sunrise for so many years that her body no longer required anyone to call her. For a moment she remained still. She listened. The village was almost completely silent. Only the faint murmur of the Nile reached her ears. She smiled quietly. The river still flowed. Another day had been given. Carefully she rose from her woven mat, making as little sound as possible. Her feet touched the cool packed earth floor. She wrapped a simple linen garment around her shoulders and stepped outside. The morning air felt wonderfully cool against her face. She closed her eyes for just a moment. Soon the heat would return. Soon dust would rise from the roads. Soon every workshop would fill with steady labor. But not yet. For now, the village belonged to peace. She walked slowly toward a small clay oven standing beside the house. Yesterday's ashes remained inside. With practiced hands she arranged fresh fuel. She did not stop to think about each movement. Her hands had learned them decades earlier. Nearby, another woman emerged from her own doorway carrying an empty basket. The two neighbors exchanged gentle smiles. No long conversation was necessary. Both understood exactly what the morning held. Their friendship rested comfortably inside shared routine. As more people awakened, soft sounds gradually returned to the village. A wooden door opened. Someone swept a courtyard with bundled reeds. A clay jar was lifted from its place beside the wall. The distant call of a rooster echoed across the fields. These were not dramatic sounds. They were reassuring ones. Each familiar noise quietly announced that another ordinary day had begun exactly as expected. Children woke more slowly. Some rubbed sleepy eyes while listening to their parents moving around the house. Others remained wrapped inside linen blankets for a few peaceful moments longer, enjoying the cool air before the warmth of the day arrived. One small boy watched his father tying leather sandals. The father noticed curious eyes upon him. Without speaking, he motioned for the child to come closer. The boy sat beside him. Patiently, the father demonstrated how the straps crossed over the foot. The child copied the movement. His fingers struggled with the knots. The leather slipped once. Then twice. The father simply waited. There was no frustration. Only quiet encouragement. Eventually the knot held. The boy smiled. The father nodded. Another tiny lesson had become part of the child's memory. This is how traditions often survived. Not through grand ceremonies. Not through written commands. But through thousands of peaceful moments shared between people who loved one another. As dawn brightened, the village slowly filled with the smell of fresh grain being ground. The sound was unmistakable. Heavy stones moved steadily back and forth. Again. And again. Again. Each household added its own gentle rhythm until the entire village seemed to breathe together. Stone against grain. Grain becoming flour. Flour becoming bread. Bread becoming another day's strength. The movement required effort. Women leaned forward with practiced shoulders. Fine dust settled upon their arms. Children occasionally helped by adding fresh grain to the grinding stone. The work was repetitive. Yet repetition itself carried comfort. The hands always knew what came next. Nearby, a young girl carefully watched her grandmother kneading dough. Not too much water, the grandmother whispered. She pressed the dough gently. Feel it? The little girl placed both hands upon the mixture. It felt cool, soft, slightly rough from the grain. She smiled at the unfamiliar texture. The grandmother laughed quietly. Tomorrow you will remember. She was right. The child would remember. Not only tomorrow. Perhaps for the rest of her life. Years later, she might guide another pair of small hands through the same simple lesson. The bread itself would disappear before sunset. But the knowledge would remain. Outside the village, fishermen prepared their boats before sunrise. The river looked almost silver beneath the fading stars. Mist hovered gently above the water, drifting so slowly that it seemed part of a dream. One fisherman paused before stepping into his boat. He looked across the broad river toward the eastern horizon. Soon the first sunlight would appear. He had watched this moment thousands of times. Yet it never seemed ordinary. Every dawn carried quiet beauty. Not because it was different. Because it returned faithfully. Nearby, an older fisherman checked the woven net one final time. Every knot remained secure. Every rope lay neatly coiled. His youngest son watched carefully. The father noticed him. "Why do we always prepare everything before sunrise?" the boy asked softly. The father rested one weathered hand upon the side of the boat. "When the light comes," he replied, "the river deserves all of our attention." The boy thought quietly. He understood. Preparation belonged to the night. Work belonged to the day. Everything had its proper time. This gentle order appeared everywhere throughout Egyptian life. The baker prepared before dawn. The farmer sharpened tools before reaching the field. The potter gathered clay before beginning his wheel. The scribe mixed fresh ink before writing. Careful beginnings often created peaceful endings. As the first golden light finally appeared above the eastern horizon, it touched the tops of the palm trees before slowly spreading across the village. Mud brick walls glowed with warm color. The Nile shimmered like polished bronze. Birds lifted into the brightening sky. The entire valley awakened together. People paused for only a moment to welcome the new day. Then familiar routines quietly continued. Sandals stepped onto dusty roads. Oxen began their slow walk toward the fields. Children carried baskets almost as large as themselves. Merchants arranged simple goods beneath woven shelters. The potter's wheel began turning. The carpenter lifted his first piece of wood. The blacksmith stirred glowing coals until tiny sparks floated upward. Every movement fit naturally beside the next. Like threads woven into one large piece of linen, each person's work supported the lives of everyone around them. Perhaps this was the deepest reason traditions became so treasured. They reminded every individual that they belonged to something larger than themselves. One family's careful farming fed another family. A potter's patient work protected grain from rain and insects. A fisherman's steady hands brought food from the river. A weaver's cloth became garments for neighbors. No task stood alone. Every custom quietly connected one life to another. As the sun continued climbing into the clear Egyptian sky, another ordinary day unfolded across the valley. The routines were familiar. The work was demanding. The pace remained calm. And beneath every simple action, every shared lesson, every careful habit, there lived a quiet understanding that the old ways had carried countless generations safely through the seasons, just as the patient Nile continued its endless journey through the heart of Egypt, never hurried, never forgotten, and always returning with the gentle promise of another peaceful dawn. The sun climbed a little higher above the eastern horizon, and the coolness of dawn slowly gave way to the gentle warmth of another Egyptian morning. Light spread across the valley in quiet layers. First it touched the tops of the date palms. Then it reached the flat roofs of the mud brick houses. Soon it flowed across narrow footpaths, irrigation canals, and fields where countless hands would spend another day tending the rich dark soil left behind by the Nile. The village was now fully awake. Smoke rose from many small ovens, drifting upward in pale ribbons before disappearing into the clear blue sky. The smell of fresh bread lingered in every corner of the settlement, mixing with the scent of damp earth, river water, and warm reeds drying beside the canals. Nothing about this morning felt unusual. That was exactly how people hoped it would be. For the families who lived here, an ordinary day was often a blessing. When the seasons followed their familiar path, there was food. When the river behaved as expected, there was life. When each person remembered their duties, the village remained peaceful. Tradition was not merely an old habit. It was the quiet thread that held every household together. Along one dusty road, a young farmer walked beside his father. Neither carried expensive tools. Each held a simple wooden hoe polished smooth by years of use. The wood had grown darker where countless hands had gripped it. The younger man glanced toward the older one. His father walked at the same steady pace every morning. Never too quickly. Never too slowly. As they reached the fields, the older farmer knelt and scooped a handful of soil into his palm. He rubbed it gently between his fingers. The earth still held a little moisture from the irrigation channels. He nodded with quiet satisfaction. The younger farmer watched closely. He had seen this simple gesture hundreds of times. Even so, he watched again. Some lessons were worth seeing over and over. "The soil speaks," the older man said softly. "You only need to learn how to listen." The sun looked down at the dark earth. At first, it seemed silent. But after many seasons, he would learn to notice its small signs. Soil that crumbled too easily. Soil that clung together. The scent after fresh water passed through the canals. The tiny shoots pushing through the surface. These were quiet messages. They rewarded patience. Nearby, women worked together in a small vegetable garden beside the village. Rows of onions, beans, lettuce, and herbs stretched neatly beneath the morning light. Each plant had its own place. Nothing was scattered carelessly. The garden reflected the careful order that shaped so much of Egyptian life. One woman gently removed weeds from between the young plants. Her daughter worked beside her. The child occasionally reached toward the wrong leaves. Her mother smiled and carefully guided her hand. "Leave this one." She pointed toward the tender vegetable. "Take that one." The girl nodded. She pulled the weed free. The work continued. No frustration. No hurry. Only another quiet lesson becoming part of everyday life. The Egyptians understood that children learned best by joining the work itself. There were few long speeches. Few formal classrooms for ordinary families. Knowledge grew naturally beside gardens, ovens, boats, workshops, and fields. Life was the classroom. Parents were the teachers. Time was the patient guide. As the morning advanced, the narrow roads became busier. Merchants slowly arranged their goods beneath simple woven shelters. Baskets filled with onions, garlic, dates, figs, and grain appeared one after another. Pottery jars stood neatly beside folded linen cloth. Bundles of papyrus rested against wooden poles. Fresh fish, caught before sunrise, lay upon damp reeds to keep them cool for as long as possible. People greeted one another warmly. Most had known each other their entire lives. Families often remained in the same villages for generations. Faces became as familiar as the houses themselves. An elderly merchant welcomed each customer with the same calm smile. He knew many by name. He remembered which family preferred barley instead of emmer wheat. He remembered whose daughter had recently married. He remembered which fishermen usually arrived after returning from the river. These small memories strengthened the village. People trusted one another because they shared years of ordinary life together. Trust itself became another tradition. Nearby, a potter sat before his wheel. A lump of cool clay rested in the center. He sprinkled a little water across its surface. Then the wheel began to turn. Slowly at first. Then smoothly. His hands closed gently around the spinning clay. The shape changed almost immediately. A thick mound became a tall cylinder. The cylinder widened into a graceful storage jar. His fingers barely seemed to move. Years of repetition had removed every unnecessary motion. Watching him work felt almost peaceful. The clay offered no resistance. The wheel hummed softly beneath steady hands. Even those passing along the road often slowed their pace for a moment, quietly admiring the calm rhythm of his craft. A small boy stood watching from nearby. He had watched many times before. Today, the potter noticed him. "Come." The boy stepped forward. The potter guided his small hands toward the spinning clay. At first the boy pressed too firmly. The jar leaned to one side. The potter chuckled softly. Gently. The pressure eased. The clay responded. The vessel slowly straightened. The boy's eyes widened with quiet wonder. He realized the clay answered every movement. The potter nodded. "So do people." The boy looked puzzled. "If your hands are calm," the potter continued, "the clay becomes calm." The lesson was about much more than pottery. In Egypt, patience shaped nearly every skill. Not far away, inside a modest workshop, the steady tapping of stone echoed softly through the warm air. A mason carefully smoothed the surface of a limestone block. Each strike of the hammer was measured. Too hard, and the stone might crack. Too soft, and little progress would be made. He had learned this balance many years earlier. His apprentice collected loose fragments nearby. The younger man's hands were already rough despite his youth. Stone dust covered both of them from head to foot. They worked without complaint. The work demanded strength. But it also demanded attention. Large buildings did not rise because people hurried. They rose because thousands of careful hands repeated small tasks faithfully every day. Many years later, travelers might admire the finished structure. Few would ever think about the countless ordinary mornings that made it possible. The same was true of Egyptian traditions. Visitors might notice magnificent temples. They might wonder at enormous statues. But beneath every great achievement stood generations of quiet workers who simply continued doing today's work before worrying about tomorrow's. As the heat slowly increased, the sounds of the village settled into their familiar pattern. Grinding stones. Children laughing. Donkeys walking. Birds calling from the reeds. The splash of water against irrigation gates. Wooden wheels turning. Soft conversations carried by the breeze. None of these sounds stood above the others. Together they created the peaceful voice of everyday Egypt. Along the riverbank, fishermen returned with their morning catch. Their boats glided gently toward shore. Neighbors gathered to help unload woven baskets filled with fresh fish. Everyone understood that today's catch would soon become meals for many households. Some fish would be eaten immediately. Others would be salted and dried beneath the sun to last much longer. Nothing useful was wasted. Carefulness reached into every corner of life. Children helped carry smaller baskets. Women prepared clay jars for preserving food. Older men repaired paddles while younger ones cleaned the boats. No single person completed every task. Everyone shared the work. This shared responsibility strengthened both families and traditions. Each generation understood that their efforts supported not only themselves but also neighbors, relatives, and friends. As midday approached, the sunlight grew brighter. The air shimmered above the fields. Workers paused more often to drink cool water stored inside thick clay jars. The jars had rested in shaded corners where evaporation helped keep the water pleasantly cool. A simple invention. Quietly effective. Like so many Egyptian customs, it had survived because it worked. A farmer lifted one of these jars carefully. He poured water into a small cup for his youngest son. The boy drank slowly. Then offered the cup back without being asked. The father smiled. Simple manners had become habit. Habits became character. Character became tradition. Nothing about the exchange seemed remarkable. Yet thousands of similar moments quietly shaped every generation. By now the village moved almost as one living community. Fields, workshops, gardens, ovens, boats, and homes all worked together in a rhythm refined across centuries. No one believed they were creating history. They believed they were simply living well. Perhaps that is why their traditions endured for so long. They were woven into ordinary days rather than reserved for special occasions. Every loaf of bread, every repaired fishing net, every carefully folded linen garment, every shared cup of cool river water, every patient lesson between parent and child. Each small act quietly strengthened the invisible thread connecting one generation to the next, allowing the people of ancient Egypt to move through their days with steady hearts, trusted routines, and the comforting certainty that tomorrow would begin, once again, beneath the same golden sun rising gently over the timeless waters of the Nile. As the sun climbed toward the middle of the sky, the village slowly settled into the quiet determination that belonged to every working day. The cool freshness of morning had gently slipped away. Warm air now rested over the valley, and the light became brighter with each passing moment. The shadows that had stretched long across the fields at dawn slowly gathered beneath trees, walls, and the feet of those moving carefully through their daily work. The heat was never a surprise. Every family expected it. Every child grew up learning that the strongest work belonged to the cooler hours, while the hottest part of the day asked for patience, steady breathing, and careful use of one's strength. The people did not struggle against the rhythm of the land. Instead, they shaped their lives around it. This quiet understanding was one of the oldest traditions in Egypt. Nature set the pace. People followed. Across the fields, a pair of oxen walked slowly beside a farmer guiding a simple wooden plow. The animals moved with calm certainty, their broad hooves pressing deep into the dark soil that had been softened by irrigation. The plow left neat lines behind them, preparing the earth for another season that was still many days away. The farmer rarely spoke. There was little need. The oxen already knew the path. His hands already knew the weight of the wooden handle. Even his footsteps seemed to fall in familiar places. He had followed this same route since he was a young boy walking beside his own father. Now his hair carried a few strands of gray. The seasons had quietly marked the passing years. He paused only when one of the oxen stopped to rest. The man reached forward and gently brushed dust from the animal's neck. "There is no need to hurry," he murmured. The ox blinked slowly. Then both continued forward. Kindness toward working animals was often practical as much as compassionate. A healthy ox meant healthy fields. A healthy field meant full granaries. Full granaries meant children would sleep with full stomachs when the dry season returned. Even care itself became a tradition. Not because it was written into law. Because generations had learned its value through experience. Nearby, another group of farmers tended the irrigation canals that stretched like quiet blue ribbons across the land. Water moved steadily through narrow channels lined with packed earth. Some men removed small clumps of reeds that slowed the flow. Others reinforced the canal walls where the current had gently worn away the soil. Their work was careful rather than forceful. Too much digging could weaken the banks. Too little attention could leave fields without enough water. Balance mattered. One elderly farmer knelt beside the canal and dipped his hand into the cool water. He smiled faintly. The river was generous this season. He remembered years when the water had been lower. He also remembered seasons when the flood had spread farther than expected. Every memory helped him judge the present. Young workers often asked for his advice. Not because he held great authority. Because he had simply lived long enough to observe many cycles of the river. Age brought quiet respect. An older person carried something precious that could not be stored inside a jar or written upon papyrus. They carried memory. And memory helped preserve tradition. Farther along the village road, a young mother sat beneath the shade of a sycamore fig tree while mending a linen tunic. The fabric had become thin at the elbows after many months of work in the fields. Instead of replacing it, she patiently repaired it with careful stitches. Thread passed through cloth. Again. And again. Each stitch was small. Almost invisible. She had learned this skill from her own mother many years earlier. Beside her sat two little daughters. One quietly twisted flax fibers into thread. The other watched every movement of the needle. The younger child finally asked, "Why don't we make a new one?" The mother smiled without looking up. "Because this one still has many days left." The answer was simple. Useful things deserved care. Waste was avoided whenever possible. Making linen required months of labor, from planting flax beside the Nile to spinning thread and weaving cloth. Every garment represented many patient hands. The children nodded. They accepted the lesson without question. Not because they had been ordered to. Because they had seen the same careful habits practiced every day. Across the village, the steady tapping of looms filled several homes. Women sat before wooden frames, weaving thread into long strips of linen cloth. Their hands moved with graceful rhythm, passing the shuttle from one side to the other. Back and forth. Back and forth. The sound blended softly with distant birdsong and the occasional low call of cattle grazing near the river. Weaving demanded concentration. A single careless mistake could leave uneven patterns or weak places in the cloth. Yet experienced weavers rarely needed to stop. Their fingers remembered every movement. It was another example of tradition living within the body. Skill became instinct through repetition. One elderly weaver had been making linen for more than 40 years. Her eyesight was not as sharp as before, yet her hands still worked with remarkable confidence. A young apprentice watched quietly nearby. Occasionally the older woman paused. She adjusted a thread. She tightened another. Then the weaving continued. The apprentice noticed that her teacher never seemed rushed. "How do you work so smoothly?" the young woman asked. The older weaver smiled. "I stopped trying to finish." The apprentice looked puzzled. "I only think about the next thread." The young woman considered those words while watching the loom once more. One thread. Then another. A whole piece of cloth was never woven all at once. It appeared little by little. Much like a lifetime. Much like tradition itself. By midday the marketplace had become quieter. Many people had already finished buying what they needed before the strongest heat arrived. Merchants now sat beneath woven awnings, grateful for every patch of shade. Clay jars filled with cool water stood beside baskets of dates and figs. Customers lingered only briefly before returning home. An elderly spice seller carefully arranged small bundles of dried herbs. Mint, coriander, dill, cumin. The gentle fragrance drifted through the warm air. He handled each bundle with surprising care. His grandson watched nearby. "Does it matter where they are placed?" the boy asked. The old man nodded. "When your hands know where everything belongs, your mind becomes peaceful." The boy slowly helped rearrange the herbs. After a while, he no longer needed instructions. His hands began finding their places naturally. The old merchant smiled to himself. Another lesson quietly planted. As the sun reached its highest point, many workers paused. This was not laziness. It was wisdom. Shade became precious. Some rested beneath clusters of palm trees. Others gathered inside thick-walled homes where the mud bricks kept the rooms noticeably cooler than the open fields. Bread was shared once again. So were onions, lentils, cucumbers, dried fish, and fresh water. Meals remained simple. Yet there was comfort in their familiarity. Every family knew these flavors. Children associated them with safety. Adults associated them with home. Food carried memory just as surely as stories did. A young boy bit into a warm piece of bread and quietly watched his grandfather sitting nearby. The old man closed his eyes for a moment as he ate. Not because he was tired. Because he appreciated the quiet. After finishing, he spoke almost to himself. "My grandfather ate bread like this." The boy listened. "My father did too." He looked down at the loaf resting in his own hands. "And now you." The child smiled. It was only bread. Yet somehow it connected 3 generations sitting beneath the same tree. Perhaps 4. Perhaps 5. Simple things often carried the deepest meaning. When the hottest hour finally began to soften, movement slowly returned to the village. Farmers rose from the shade. Craftsmen reopened workshop doors. Children resumed small chores. Life flowed forward once again without anyone announcing it. The rhythm simply continued. As always. Near the river, a young fisherman sat beside an older boat builder shaping a fresh wooden oar. The craftsman examined the grain carefully before carving. He removed only thin shavings with each stroke of his blade. The younger man asked why he worked so slowly. The old craftsman ran one hand across the smooth wood. "Trees grow slowly." He paused. "So boats should be built patiently." The fisherman nodded. The answer felt right. Nothing lasting came from haste. The same thought could have been spoken by the potter, or the baker, or the farmer. Across many different lives, the wisdom remained remarkably similar. As afternoon approached, a gentle breeze began moving once again across the Nile. It carried the fresh scent of water into the village, softening the dry warmth that had settled over the land since morning. People lifted their faces toward it almost without thinking. The breeze was familiar. It had cooled their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors stretching back farther than memory could reach. Children paused in their work to enjoy it for just a moment before returning to their tasks. No one wished to waste the cool air. No one wished to waste the day. And so, Beneath the bright Egyptian sky, another quiet afternoon unfolded with the same calm purpose that had guided countless days before it. Each careful stitch, each measured footstep, each shared meal, and each patient lesson becoming another small thread woven into the enduring fabric of Egyptian tradition, a fabric strengthened not by grand events, but by ordinary people faithfully repeating the gentle routines that allowed life beside the timeless Nile to continue in peace from one generation to the next. The afternoon drifted onward with the quiet patience that seemed to belong only to the Nile Valley. The strongest heat had begun to soften, though the air still shimmered above the fields where rows of grain stood patiently beneath the bright Egyptian sun. A gentle breeze wandered in from the river, carrying with it the scent of fresh water, damp reeds, and the rich black earth that had fed families for longer than anyone could remember. The breeze did not erase the warmth. It simply reminded everyone that evening would come in its own time. No one expected the day to rush toward its ending. In ancient Egypt, waiting was part of living. Across the village, work continued with the same calm rhythm that had filled countless afternoons before. A carpenter stood beneath the shade of a woven canopy, smoothing the surface of a cedar chest with a piece of rough sandstone. Fine curls of wood gathered around his feet. Each stroke of his hands followed the grain instead of fighting against it. His apprentice watched closely. "You always move in the same direction," the young man observed. The carpenter nodded without lifting his eyes from the wood. The tree spent many years growing this way. He brushed away the dust with his palm. "I see no reason to argue with it." The apprentice smiled quietly. It was another simple lesson. Nature offered guidance to those willing to notice. Much of Egyptian tradition grew from that quiet observation. People did not imagine themselves separate from the land. They belonged to it. The river shaped their seasons. The desert marked their boundaries. The sun decided when work should begin and when it should slow. To live well meant learning the rhythm of these things instead of resisting them. Not far away, two sisters gathered bundles of dried reeds near the edge of an irrigation canal. The reeds would become mats for sleeping, baskets for carrying grain, and simple coverings for jars of fresh bread. Nothing useful was overlooked. The younger sister reached for a reed that had become brittle beneath the sun. Her older sister gently shook her head. "This one breaks too easily." She selected another instead. "Feel the difference." The younger girl ran her fingers along the smooth stem. It bent slightly without cracking. She nodded with understanding. No long explanation was needed. Her hands had already learned the lesson. These quiet moments filled every ordinary day. Children rarely realized they were being taught. Parents rarely announced that they were teaching. Life simply unfolded, and knowledge traveled beside it. A little farther along the road, an elderly basket maker sat outside his home beneath the shade of a sycamore tree. Several unfinished baskets rested around him. Some were large enough to carry harvested grain. Others were small enough to hold onions, herbs, or fresh dates. His fingers moved with remarkable steadiness despite their age. Each strip of reed crossed another. Over. Under. Over. Under. The pattern repeated so many times that it almost resembled breathing. A small granddaughter sat nearby with her own bundle of reeds. Her first basket leaned unevenly to one side. She frowned. The old man chuckled softly. "It doesn't have to be perfect today." She looked up. "It doesn't." He smiled warmly. "It only has to be better than yesterday." The little girl relaxed. She began weaving again. This time her hands moved more slowly. More carefully. The basket was still uneven. But it stood upright. The old man nodded with quiet approval. Improvement, not perfection, had always carried the village forward. Perhaps this gentle patience explained why traditions survived for so many centuries. People accepted that learning took time. They gave one another room to grow. By the middle of the afternoon, several boats had returned to the riverbank after checking fishing traps placed earlier that morning. The fishermen unloaded woven baskets one by one. Some contained perch. Others held catfish glistening in the sunlight. A few baskets were nearly empty. The men accepted both outcomes with calm expressions. The river gave generously on some days. On others, it asked for patience. An experienced fisherman rarely judged his success by one afternoon alone. He thought instead in seasons. One younger fisherman looked disappointed by the small catch. An older companion placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder. The river remembers. The younger man looked puzzled. The older fisherman smiled. If you care for it today, it cares for you tomorrow. The words stayed with the younger man. Respect for the Nile was more than gratitude. It was understanding. The river could never be forced. Only honored. Nearby, women cleaned the fresh fish beside flat stones near the water's edge. Their movements were practiced and efficient. Some fish would be cooked before sunset. Others would be salted carefully for future days. Children carried small clay bowls filled with coarse salt from nearby homes. Even the youngest members of the village understood that today's work often prepared tomorrow's meals. Nothing belonged only to the present. Every action quietly reached into the future. As shadows slowly lengthened, the sounds of craftsmen filled the village once more. The potter's wheel turned steadily. The blacksmith's hammer rose and fell with measured rhythm. Stonemasons shaped limestone blocks with careful strikes that echoed softly across the warm air. None of them hurried. They understood something that every experienced worker eventually learns. Haste often creates more work than patience. A cracked pot must be remade. A broken tool must be repaired. A careless measurement wastes precious materials. Taking a little longer often saved many hours later. These ideas became traditions because they proved themselves again and again across generations. Inside a modest home near the center of the village, a grandmother sorted dried herbs gathered during previous weeks. Small bundles rested upon woven mats. Chamomile, mint, coriander, fenugreek. Leaves and flowers slowly dried beneath the shade before being stored inside clay jars. The herbs would later flavor food or comfort someone feeling unwell. Her grandson watched with quiet curiosity. "How do you remember which is which?" he asked. The grandmother lifted one bundle toward him. "Smell." The boy leaned closer. A gentle fragrance filled the air. He smiled. "It smells fresh." She nodded. "Your nose remembers before your mind does." He laughed softly. Then he carefully smelled another bundle. Soon he began recognizing each one without help. Knowledge often entered through the senses long before it became words. The scent of fresh bread. The feel of smooth linen. The sound of grinding grain. The coolness of river water. These became memories that lasted a lifetime. Perhaps this is why traditions felt so comforting. They were woven into every sense. Late in the afternoon, a group of scribes sat beneath the shaded courtyard of a government storehouse. They carefully counted baskets of grain recently delivered from nearby farms. One man read numbers aloud while another marked them neatly upon papyrus. A third quietly checked each total. Accuracy mattered. Grain represented life. Families depended upon careful records. The youngest scribe had only recently begun his training. His handwriting remained uneven. Occasionally he paused to compare his symbols with those written by the older men. One senior scribe noticed. Without criticism, he gently adjusted the young man's grip on the reed pen. "Relax your hand." The younger man loosened his fingers. The lines immediately became smoother. The older scribe smiled. A tense hand cannot write peacefully. The lesson reached beyond writing. Calmness improved nearly every task. As the afternoon slowly approached evening, children finished many of their daily responsibilities. Some gathered firewood from carefully chosen piles of dry branches. Others carried water jars back from the river before darkness arrived. A few swept the floors of family homes using bundles of reeds tied tightly together. None of these chores appeared remarkable. Yet each one quietly prepared the household for another peaceful night. Preparation itself was deeply valued. People preferred to greet tomorrow already ready for it. One little girl carefully placed sandals beside the doorway after brushing away the dust. Her mother noticed. "You remembered." The child smiled proudly. "I always do." The mother gently touched her daughter's shoulder. Small habits often became lasting character. Nearby, the village baker examined his remaining loaves. Most had already been shared among neighboring families. Only a few remained cooling upon woven trays. He covered them carefully with clean linen cloth. Fresh bread deserved protection from dust and insects. Even after a lifetime of baking, he treated every loaf with quiet respect. Food was never taken for granted. Each loaf carried the labor of farmers, millers, water carriers, fire keepers, and bakers. Many hands worked together before a single meal reached the table. As the sun slowly lowered toward the western horizon, the harsh brightness of midday softened into warm golden light. The fields seemed almost to glow. Palm trees cast long shadows across the irrigation canals. The Nile reflected the changing sky like polished copper. People naturally slowed their pace. Not because they had become lazy. Because the day itself invited gentleness. Voices grew quieter. Tools were cleaned before being put away. Animals returned steadily toward their shelters. The village prepared itself for another peaceful evening just as it had done thousands of times before. And as the golden light settled softly across mud brick walls, woven baskets, quiet workshops, and the calm waters of the Nile, another ordinary afternoon became part of an unbroken chain of remembered days shaped by patient hands, steady hearts, familiar customs, and the quiet confidence that every careful tradition carried within it the wisdom of countless generations who had learned that a peaceful life was built not from rare moments of greatness, but from simple acts repeated faithfully beneath the same enduring Egyptian sky. The golden light of late afternoon rested gently upon the village, softening every edge it touched. The brightness that had filled the sky only a short while before slowly became warmer, calmer, and easier on tired eyes. Long shadows stretched across the narrow roads where countless sandals had passed throughout the day. Dust settled quietly after hours of footsteps, and even the breeze seemed to move more slowly, as though it too had worked beneath the Egyptian sun. The busiest part of the day was beginning to fade. No bell announced the change. No voice called the village together. People simply felt it. The lowering sun had guided their lives for so many generations that its gentle signals had become part of their own thoughts. Across the fields, farmers paused for a moment before gathering their tools. Wooden hoes rested against shoulders worn strong by years of labor. Bundles of reeds were tied neatly together. Irrigation gates were checked one final time before everyone began the familiar walk home. No one wished to leave the fields carelessly. Tomorrow's work always began with today's careful ending. An older farmer knelt beside a narrow canal. He pressed loose earth gently against one small place where water had begun to seep through the bank. His grandson watched nearby. "It is only a little hole," the boy said. The old man smiled. "It is." He pressed the damp soil firmly into place. "And tomorrow it could become a large one." The boy nodded. He understood without another word. Small problems welcomed attention while they were still small. The lesson belonged to canals. It also belonged to life. As they walked home together, neither hurried. The road curved gently beside fields of barley that swayed in the evening breeze. The older man occasionally pointed toward different plants growing near the path. One herb eased an aching stomach. Another helped soothe a sore throat. Another was useful only after being dried for many days. The boy listened carefully. The names were important. But even more important was learning where each plant preferred to grow. Some loved damp ground close to the canals. Others appeared only where the soil remained dry. The land itself quietly offered instruction to anyone willing to observe. Nearby, several women gathered linen garments that had dried beneath the afternoon sun. The fabric smelled clean and warm. Each piece was folded carefully before being placed inside woven baskets. One young mother paused to smooth a small child's tunic. The stitching along one sleeve had begun to loosen. She made a quiet note to repair it after supper. Nothing useful was ignored. A loose thread today could become a torn garment tomorrow. Across the village, similar thoughts filled many homes. Clay jars were inspected before being stored. Basket handles were checked for wear. Ropes were coiled neatly. Wooden tools were brushed clean of dirt. These simple habits asked for only a few extra moments. Yet they often saved many hours later. Perhaps this was one of the deepest roots of Egyptian tradition. People cared for tomorrow before it arrived. Not far from the riverbank, the village potter carried several newly shaped jars into the sunlight for drying. They stood in neat rows upon smooth boards. Each one looked almost identical to the next. The potter slowly walked among them. Now and then he adjusted the position of a jar by only the width of his thumb. His young apprentice watched with curiosity. "They already look perfect." The older man smiled. "They look patient." The apprentice waited. "They are still becoming what they will be." The clay felt firm. But it was not yet ready. Too much haste could ruin many hours of careful work. The jars needed time. Tomorrow they would dry a little more. After that they would meet the heat of the kiln. Only then would they become strong enough to carry water or grain. The apprentice quietly nodded. He was beginning to understand that nearly every craft in Egypt required trust in slow progress. The same patience appeared beside the river, where fishermen untangled nets after returning from the day's work. Several families sat together upon low wooden stools. The older fishermen examined every knot with practiced eyes. Children gathered broken shells that had become caught among the ropes. One little girl carefully handed each shell to her grandfather. He smiled each time she remembered to place the sharp edges into a separate basket. "Why do we separate them?" she asked. "So no one reaches into the net tomorrow and cuts a hand." The girl looked thoughtfully at the shells. A tiny act this evening could prevent pain in the morning. She placed the remaining shells into the proper basket with even greater care. Lessons like these quietly filled every hour. Safety was rarely taught through fear. It was taught through gentle attention. As evening approached, merchants slowly packed away the goods that had remained unsold. Baskets became lighter. Shelves grew emptier. Folded linen cloth disappeared into storage chests. Clay jars were covered against the coolness of the night. The marketplace itself seemed to relax after serving the village throughout the day. An elderly merchant counted a handful of copper rings used in trade. He placed each one into a small leather pouch. His grandson sat beside him, carefully stacking empty baskets. "You count them every evening?" The old man nodded. "And every morning? Even when nothing is missing?" "Especially then." The boy smiled. Routine itself protected honesty. By repeating careful habits every day, fewer mistakes found room to grow. The old merchant did not think of this as something extraordinary. To him, it was simply the proper way to finish a day's work. A little farther away, the smell of evening meals slowly drifted through the village. Clay ovens glowed with gentle warmth. Fresh bread browned quietly inside. Pots of lentils simmered over small fires. The scent of onions, garlic, herbs, and roasted fish blended together until the entire village seemed wrapped in comforting fragrance. Children noticed these familiar smells long before they reached home. Some began walking a little faster. Parents smiled when they saw eager faces. No feast waited inside. Only another simple meal shared together. Yet after a full day beneath the Egyptian sun, few things felt more welcoming. Inside one modest home, an elderly grandmother stirred a pot while her granddaughter carefully arranged bread upon a woven tray. The little girl paused. She placed the largest loaf in the center. Then smaller pieces around it. Her grandmother watched quietly. Finally she asked, "Why there?" The girl thought for a moment. "So everyone can reach it?" The older woman smiled warmly. A good answer. The arrangement seemed small. Yet even the placement of bread reflected consideration for others. Children absorbed such customs long before they understood their deeper meaning. As families gathered, conversation remained gentle. People rarely spoke loudly after a long day of labor. The quiet itself felt comforting. A father described how the irrigation channel had flowed more smoothly than expected. His wife mentioned that next week would be a good time to gather more flax. Their oldest son explained how he had finally repaired a broken hoe handle without assistance. The youngest child proudly announced that she had remembered every herb her grandmother had shown her that afternoon. Everyone listened. Even small achievements deserved quiet acknowledgement. The meal passed slowly. Nobody hurried to finish. Outside, birds settled among the palm trees. Their evening songs became fewer with each passing moment. The first stars appeared high above the eastern horizon. Many villagers noticed them almost without thinking. The stars had watched over their ancestors. Tonight they would watch over them as well. After supper, families stepped outside into the welcome coolness. The heat stored inside the earth began to fade. A pleasant breeze crossed the river and wandered through the narrow streets. People breathed more deeply. Some sat upon low stools near their doorways. Others rested upon woven mats spread across flat rooftops where the evening air moved more freely. Children leaned against parents who were too tired for many words but never too tired for quiet company. An elderly storyteller sat beneath a date palm surrounded by several grandchildren. He did not tell stories of great battles. Instead, he spoke about his own grandfather. He remembered watching him repair baskets beside the river. He remembered the songs women sang while grinding grain. He remembered carrying water jars that seemed impossibly heavy when he was young. The children listened carefully. These ordinary memories became treasures. They taught that a peaceful life did not require remarkable events. It required faithful days. The oldest grandchild finally asked, "Did your grandfather do things the same way as father?" The old man smiled. "In many ways. And his father? The old man looked toward the stars. I believe so. The child grew quiet. For the first time, he began imagining the long chain of people stretching behind his own family. People he would never meet. People whose careful habits had quietly shaped the world he now lived in. The thought brought him comfort rather than burden. He belonged to something that had endured. As darkness settled gently over the Nile Valley once again, lamps flickered inside humble homes, soft voices faded into peaceful silence, and another ordinary day became part of the living memory of Egypt, a day filled not with grand triumphs or dramatic change, but with steady work, shared meals, patient teaching, thoughtful preparation, and the quiet traditions that allowed generation after generation to greet each sunrise with familiar hands, grateful hearts, and the calm assurance that the gentle rhythm of life beside the timeless river would continue once more with the coming dawn. Night settled fully across the Nile Valley, wrapping the village in a gentle darkness that felt familiar rather than frightening. The last colors of sunset had disappeared beyond the western desert. In their place, countless stars quietly filled the heavens, each one shining with a calm brightness above the sleeping land. The moon had not yet climbed high, leaving the sky deep and clear, untouched by anything except distant light and the slow drifting of cool night air. The village had become wonderfully still. Only a few oil lamps remained lit inside small homes. Their soft glow slipped through narrow doorways and tiny windows before fading into the darkness outside. The smell of warm bread lingered in the air. So did the faint scent of wood smoke, baked clay, and river reeds that had dried beneath the afternoon sun. These familiar fragrances remained long after the evening meal had ended. For many families, this quiet hour belonged neither to work nor to sleep. It belonged to simply being together. Outside one modest home, a father and his two sons sat upon a woven mat spread across the packed earth. The younger boy rested his head against his father's shoulder. The older one watched the stars. For a long while, no one spoke. Silence was never considered empty. It was another kind of conversation. The father finally lifted one hand toward the sky. When I was your age, he said softly, my father showed me those same stars. The boys looked upward. The pattern seemed endless. So did his father, he continued. The younger child smiled. Did the stars look the same? The father laughed quietly. They have always been patient. The little boy nodded as though that answer explained everything. Perhaps it did. The stars reminded people that some things remained steady through every season. The river flowed. The sun returned. The moon changed its shape and then began again. Children became parents. Parents became grandparents. Life moved gently forward without forgetting what had come before. This feeling gave comfort to many ordinary people. Tradition was not only about repeating old actions. It was about belonging to something that continued long after one lifetime ended. Across the village, an elderly woman quietly prepared her home for the night. She covered clay jars to keep insects away. She folded linen cloths with careful hands. She swept away the last traces of dust that had drifted in through the open doorway during the day. None of these tasks required much effort. Yet she completed them every evening. Her daughter had once asked why she never skipped them. The older woman had smiled gently. Tomorrow deserves a clean beginning. Those simple words stayed with her daughter throughout adulthood. Now, many years later, she repeated the same quiet habits inside her own home. Not because anyone demanded them. Because they made each new day feel peaceful from its very first moment. Nearby, a young couple gently rocked their infant to sleep. The child had spent much of the evening listening to familiar voices, warm laughter, and the soft crackling of the cooking fire. Now only quiet remained. The mother hummed a simple melody that her own mother had sung long ago. Its words were few. Its tune rose and fell slowly like the gentle movement of water. The father smiled as he listened. He had heard the same lullaby in his childhood. He could not remember learning it. It had always been there. Songs often traveled farther than memories. No one knew who first sang those gentle notes. No one needed to know. The song belonged to everyone. In another part of the village, several elderly men gathered beneath a sycamore fig tree where the evening breeze remained pleasantly cool. They had finished their work many hours earlier. Now they simply enjoyed one another's company. One spoke quietly about the coming flood season. Another remembered a harvest from many years ago when the grain had grown unusually tall. The others listened patiently. No one interrupted. Every memory carried value. The oldest among them rarely spoke first. But when he finally did, everyone turned toward him. His voice had become softer with age. His hands showed the marks of decades spent working beside the river. When I was young, he began, I believed strength came from hard work. The others nodded. I still believe that. He smiled. But I have learned something else. The group waited. Peace comes from knowing where you belong. No one answered immediately. There was no need. The words settled quietly among them. Every man understood. Their place was here. Beside the Nile. Among familiar faces. Within customs that had guided their families through countless seasons. Elsewhere, a fisherman quietly inspected his boat before finally resting for the night. He ran one hand along the smooth wooden edge. The rope remained tightly fastened. The paddles rested exactly where they belonged. Tomorrow before sunrise, he would untie the boat once more. He found comfort in that thought. Preparation had become as natural as breathing. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the gentle sound of water touching the shore. The Nile never hurried. Its current flowed with calm certainty. Watching the river year after year had slowly changed the people who lived beside it. They, too, learned to move steadily instead of quickly. Patience became almost invisible because everyone shared it. Children saw patient parents. Apprentices saw patient craftsmen. Young farmers watched patient elders waiting for crops to grow. Without realizing it, they slowly became patient themselves. Perhaps traditions lasted because they shaped not only actions but also character. Farther along the quiet riverbank, moonlight finally appeared above the eastern horizon. Its pale glow spread gently across the water until the entire river shimmered like polished silver. Fishing boats rocked softly against their wooden posts. Papyrus reeds swayed almost silently. A cool breeze brushed across the surface before drifting toward the sleeping village. Many families welcomed that breeze through open doorways. Inside one home, an elderly grandmother remained awake just a little longer than everyone else. She sat beside a small oil lamp, repairing a child's sandal that had begun to loosen along one strap. Her eyesight was no longer perfect. She held the leather close to the light. The stitching required careful attention. Thread passed through leather. Pulled tight. Then another stitch. Then another. Each movement was slow. Steady. Peaceful. No one had asked her to repair the sandal tonight. She simply knew that the child would need it tomorrow morning. Acts of care often happened quietly, without announcement. Many traditions survived because people loved one another enough to perform small kindnesses that might never be noticed. When the sandal was finished, she placed it neatly beside the doorway. Then she gently lowered the lamp's flame. The room became darker. Soon she rested beside her family. Outside, the village seemed almost completely asleep. Only the soft chorus of insects continued beneath the stars. The distant call of a night bird echoed briefly across the fields before fading into silence. The cool earth slowly released the warmth it had gathered during the day. Everything felt calm. Everything felt settled. Hours passed quietly. The moon climbed higher. Its light shifted across rooftops, courtyards, and sleeping gardens. Nothing asked for attention. Nothing demanded urgency. Even time itself seemed to move more gently during these peaceful hours. Not far from the village, the broad fields rested beneath moonlight. Tomorrow they would once again welcome careful hands. The irrigation canals reflected the stars without disturbance. Grain waited patiently for another sunrise. The land itself seemed to breathe. The people believed that order existed throughout the world around them. The heavens followed their paths. The river followed its course. The seasons returned when their time arrived. In many ways, their own traditions reflected the same quiet order. To rise before dawn. To share bread. To care for neighbors. To respect elders. To teach children patiently. To prepare before beginning. To finish each task with care. These customs did more than organize daily life. They offered reassurance. When so much of nature remained beyond human control, familiar routines reminded people that some parts of life could still remain steady. And so, beneath a sky filled with ancient stars, while the timeless Nile whispered softly beside fields resting in peaceful darkness, another night embraced the village with gentle certainty, allowing weary workers, careful mothers, thoughtful craftsmen, patient fishermen, curious children, and wise elders to sleep with quiet hearts, trusting that when the first pale light returned to the eastern horizon, the beloved rhythms of their lives would awaken once more, just as faithfully as they had for countless generations before them. The deepest hours of the night passed almost unnoticed. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, casting a gentle silver light over the sleeping village. Flat rooftops, quiet courtyards, and narrow paths all rested beneath the same peaceful glow. The day's footprints remained pressed into the dusty roads, untouched now by wandering sandals or the small wheels of handcarts. The village had become completely still. Only the Nile continued to move. Its steady current slipped past reeds and riverbanks with the same quiet confidence it had carried for thousands of years. The water neither hurried nor paused. It simply flowed, patient and faithful beneath the stars. For the people who lived beside it, the river became more than a source of water. It became a teacher. Its lessons were never spoken aloud. Instead, they revealed themselves little by little across an entire lifetime. Children first noticed how the river returned each year with fresh water. As they grew older, they understood that planting depended upon it. Years later, after raising families of their own, they realized that nearly every custom in their lives had quietly grown from the river's dependable rhythm. The flood arrived. The soil became rich. Seeds were planted. The harvest came. Grain filled the storehouses. Bread filled the tables. Families endured another season. Because the river repeated its work without fail, people learned to repeat theirs as well. Perhaps this was one of the greatest reasons traditions became so deeply rooted. The natural world itself seemed built upon repetition. Inside one small home, a young boy stirred in his sleep. Tomorrow would be his first day helping his older brother in the flax fields. Only a few simple tasks had been given to him. He would carry small bundles. He would gather loose fibers. He would watch carefully. Still, The thought remained in his mind even while he dreamed. His father had noticed the boy's quiet nervousness before bedtime. Without many words, he had rested one hand upon the child's shoulder. "You only need to learn one thing tomorrow." The boy had looked up. "What is that?" "Watch." "Nothing more." The father understood that watching came before doing. Doing came before understanding. Understanding came before teaching. This gentle order shaped nearly every skill passed from one generation to the next. Across the village, another family slept beneath the open sky upon the flat roof of their home. During the warmer months, many people preferred the cool night air above the house rather than the warmth held inside thick mud brick walls. Woven mats covered the roof. Simple linen blankets rested lightly across sleeping bodies. The breeze from the Nile drifted across their faces. The youngest child had fallen asleep while counting stars. His mother smiled when she noticed one tiny finger still pointing upward. She gently lowered his hand and tucked the blanket a little closer around his shoulders. Then she looked toward the heavens herself. Her grandmother had once told her that every generation looked upon the same stars with different hopes but the same quiet wonder. Now she understood those words more deeply than ever before. The stars remained unchanged. People changed. Children grew. Parents aged. Grandparents slowly disappeared into memory. Yet the sky continued watching over every generation with calm patience. That thought brought comfort rather than sadness. Elsewhere, near the edge of the village, an elderly potter awoke briefly during the night. Age often shortened his sleep. He sat quietly for a few moments outside his home. The air felt wonderfully cool. His hands rested upon his knees. They were broad hands. Strong hands. Hands that had shaped thousands upon thousands of vessels across the decades. Some of those jars still served families in nearby villages. Others had broken long ago and quietly returned to the earth from which they had first been formed. The old man did not think about fame. He wondered instead whether his apprentice would remember to cover the newly shaped pots before tomorrow's sun became too hot. He smiled softly. The young man usually remembered. If not, there would simply be another lesson. No one learned perfectly. Even after many years, every craftsman continued learning something new. The potter stood, stretched his tired shoulders, and looked toward the river. Moonlight shimmered across the water. He whispered a quiet word of thanks before returning to his mat. Not because anything remarkable had happened that day. Because ordinary days themselves were gifts. This simple gratitude appeared in many Egyptian homes. People thanked the gods not only during festivals or great celebrations. They also gave thanks for bread that baked well. For children recovering from illness. For a healthy ox. For cool evening breezes. For water flowing steadily through the canals. Life consisted mostly of ordinary blessings. The people understood this. A short distance away, inside a modest workshop, the faint scent of fresh-cut cedar still lingered from the day's work. Wood shavings covered the floor where a carpenter had spent many hours shaping a sturdy storage chest. His tools rested neatly upon a low bench. The saw. The adze. The chisels. The wooden mallet. Each lay exactly where it belonged. No tool had been left carelessly upon the floor. Before ending every day, the carpenter returned each item to its proper place. His father had done the same. His grandfather before him. The habit required only a few quiet moments. Yet tomorrow morning, every tool would be easy to find. A peaceful beginning often depended upon a careful ending. Across Egypt, countless households followed similar evening routines. Brooms leaned against walls. Grinding stones were brushed clean. Clay jars were covered. Cooking fires were safely reduced to glowing embers. Water containers were refilled. Sandals waited beside doorways. The repetition might appear ordinary to an outsider. To the people themselves, it created calm. There was comfort in waking to a house already prepared for the day ahead. As the hours slowly passed, the first signs of approaching dawn remained hidden beyond the eastern horizon. The stars still filled the heavens. Nightbirds called from distant marshes. The cool breeze continued drifting through the reeds. Even the insects seemed quieter now. Somewhere along the riverbank, an old fisherman quietly rose before anyone else. He often woke early. Not because he needed to. Because he enjoyed these silent moments before the village stirred. He untied a small bundle of rope and began checking each knot by moonlight. There was no urgency. Only habit. His fingers moved confidently despite the dim light. Every knot felt familiar. When he finished, he sat upon the edge of the dock. The water lapped gently against the wooden posts beneath him. He remembered coming here as a little boy beside his own father. Back then the dock had looked enormous. Now it seemed smaller. Time had changed him more than it had changed the river. He smiled quietly at the thought. The river did not ask people to remain young. It simply asked them to pay attention. Over many years he had learned where fish gathered after heavy floods. He had learned how certain birds announced changing weather. He had learned which winds carried cool air from the north. None of these lessons appeared inside books. They lived inside memory. Memory became wisdom. Wisdom became tradition. Eventually tradition became so natural that people no longer remembered where it had begun. They simply knew that it worked. The first faint gray light finally touched the far edge of the eastern sky. It was almost impossible to notice unless someone had been watching carefully. The fisherman noticed. So did several birds resting among the papyrus. Their soft calls broke the silence one by one. The village itself remained asleep. For a few precious moments longer, the world rested between night and morning. This quiet space belonged to no one. It belonged to everyone. The old fisherman stood slowly. He rolled his shoulders. Soon other boats would join him. Soon ovens would warm. Soon grain would be ground. Soon children would awaken to another familiar day. He did not wish for anything different. Familiarity had become one of life's greatest comforts. As the pale light gradually spread across the distant horizon, gently awakening the timeless valley one soft breath at a time, another day waited patiently beyond the darkness, ready to be shaped once more by careful hands, peaceful hearts, faithful routines, and the quiet traditions that had long guided the ordinary people of ancient Egypt, just as surely as the eternal Nile continued its calm and unending journey through the silent land. Now the first light has come softly over the eastern horizon. The sky has changed from deep blue to gentle shades of silver, then pale gold. The stars that watched over the village throughout the quiet night slowly disappear, one by one, not with sadness, but with quiet grace. Their work is finished until another evening arrives. The Nile continues its endless journey. It asks for no reward. It makes no announcement. It simply flows, as it always has, carrying cool water through reeds, beside fields, beneath small wooden boats, and past villages where countless ordinary lives have unfolded across the centuries. The people awaken once more. A baker places fresh dough into a warm oven. A farmer lifts his wooden hoe onto his shoulder. A fisherman unties the rope that held his boat through the night. A mother smooths a child's linen tunic before the day begins. An old grandmother folds a blanket that has warmed her family for many seasons. These are not great moments recorded upon monuments. They are quieter than that. Yet together they became the true heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Empires rose. Kings were crowned. Temples reached toward the sky. But beneath every monument lived millions of ordinary people whose patient routines carried the civilization gently forward, one sunrise at a time. They followed traditions because those traditions held memories. They followed them because they brought order to uncertain seasons. They followed them because parents had once shown them gentle hands, and grandparents had quietly shown those parents before them. Every loaf of bread baked over glowing coals. Every basket patiently woven from reeds. Every fishing net repaired beside the river. Every field carefully watered beneath the warm Egyptian sun. Every story whispered beneath the stars. Every lullaby softly sung to a sleepy child. These simple acts became invisible threads, joining one generation to the next until centuries quietly passed like water flowing downstream. Perhaps that is why the ancient world still feels peaceful when we imagine it now. Not because life was easy. It often was not. The days were long. The work was heavy. The summer heat could be relentless. Hands became rough. Shoulders grew tired. Feet gathered dust from endless roads. Yet within all of that labor, people found gentle comfort in familiar rhythms. Morning always returned. The river always moved. Bread was shared. Children learned. Neighbors helped one another. Evening brought cooler air. Night carried rest. Then dawn arrived again. The world remained dependable enough for hope to grow. As the sun climbs a little higher above the valley, golden light spreads across the fields one final time. Palm leaves shimmer softly in the breeze. Birds glide low above the calm river. The mud brick homes glow warmly beneath the morning sky. Smoke rises quietly from fresh cooking fires. The scent of newly baked bread drifts through narrow streets where another ordinary day is just beginning. And now, as we gently step away from this peaceful place, the village continues without us. The baker will finish his loaves. The farmer will tend the fields. The potter's wheel will turn. Children will laugh, learn, and slowly become the elders of another generation. The Nile will keep flowing, just as it always has. Nothing needs to hurry. Nothing needs to be forced. The ancient world remains exactly where we leave it, calm, steady, and timeless beneath the wide Egyptian sky. So let the warm desert breeze grow softer. Let the sound of quiet water become more distant. Let the footsteps upon dusty paths fade until they are only gentle echoes carried across the river. The voices become whispers. The whispers become silence. The lamps grow dim. The stars slowly give way to morning. The Nile flows on. And with every peaceful breath, the ancient world drifts farther away, leaving only the quiet comfort of its steady rhythms, the gentle memory of patient hands, and the lasting stillness of a civilization that found peace in ordinary days. May that same quiet rhythm stay with you now. May your thoughts become as calm as the river. May your breathing become as slow as the evening breeze moving through the reeds. May every worry settle gently into the earth like soft desert sand after the wind has passed. And as the timeless waters of the Nile continue their endless journey beneath the warm light of another peaceful dawn, may your own mind grow wonderfully still, your eyes wonderfully heavy, and your rest as deep, quiet, and comforting as an ancient Egyptian night beside the river. Sleep peacefully.